All right. Thank you all for joining me. My name is Tricia Reid, and my guest today is Todd White of Drive Farm Wines. Hi, Todd. How are you?
Hey, Tricia, thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to sharing some dirty, dark secrets of the wine business.
Fantastic. Well, let's go there. How did you get interested in the wine business?
I've been a wine aficionado I've been drinking wine since I was 9 years old. And so I have a lifelong love affair with wine. But I've also been a biohacker for, probably before it was called biohacking, right? And for people who may not know the term, I define biohacking as the art and science of how we um, influence our behavior to have um, a positive impact on our neurological or biological outcome. So, probably the most common biohack are diets. So, just having any kind of diet is a biohack because we're influencing our biological or neurological outcome. So I've been a fitness and biohacking kind of beast for uh, about probably 20 years. Um, and and then Dave Asprey comes along maybe a decade ago, so 7 or 8 years ago, and coins the term biohacking or helps make it sort of a household name in many circles. And but I've been a biohacker and a fitness enthusiast and a wine aficionado for a long, long time. And about 7 years ago, I started experimenting with a therapeutic ketogenic diet. 6 or 7 years ago. Keto didn't go mainstream until about 3 years ago, but it was dabbled in the biohacking circles 6 or 7 years ago after really following Dominic D'Agostino's research for the Department of Defense. And then that sort of started to trickle down into the biohacking community. So I started experimenting with a ketogenic diet, therapeutic keto. Today, I'm what I would consider a modified ketogenic diet. But for nearly 3 years, I was on a therapeutic ketogenic diet, which is pretty tough to maintain over a long period of time because it's so high in fat, right? And so, but when I started experimenting with this, it could have been a number of other cofactors, who knows, but I just found that I couldn't tolerate conventional wines anymore, or even high price conventional wines, right? So, and we'll get into the reasons why that's true, so I didn't think of Dry Farm Wines until later. I wasn't looking for a business. I didn't think of it as a business. I was trying to find a better way, a healthier way to drink wine for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I stopped drinking wine for a while during this period, because I just couldn't tolerate it. I couldn't process it anymore. And I really thought at the time that it was just the alcohol. So it's a very common side effect for people who go keto that they have a more difficult time tolerating alcohol. So I thought it was just the alcohol, because alcohol has been rising in wines for the last 30 years and it's quite high now in
So
conventional wines.
why the ketogenic diet? What was that important to you?
Well, like many people, well, let's say even like most people, I was trying to break through a pesky weight loss plateau. And I wasn't like overweight. I was just not quite as ripped as I wanted to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I experimented with it. Well, I had experimented with ketogenic diet 20 years ago when I was following the Atkins diet. So the Atkins diet in its pure form is really a modified keto diet. And even Robert Atkins back in that day, who was thought to be a kook at the time, even Atkins knew what we all know now, that for most people, not all, that the ketogenic diet is a very, very effective weight loss tool. So I initially experimented with it to, kind of carve off this last pesky 5 pounds, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And what other effects did you notice for yourself?
Well, that's the reason I continued it.
Uh-huh.
Right. So, and for everybody, it's different. Just like fasting. Right now, I'm on day 6 of a 7-day water fast.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do a tremendous amount of experimentation with fasting for both inflammation and anti-aging and mitochondrial renewal and autophagy, and, for all the things that we could do a podcast on fasting. But I, so for me, I'd started keto for this kind of weight loss plateau, which quickly happened, very quickly. And then I continued because of the cognitive effects. So I continued because my short-term memory increased substantially. Now, again, there are many cofactors. At the same time that I started this therapeutic ketogenic diet, I also started a very intense and regular meditation practice. And so some of the cognitive benefits, can't attribute, there's no way for me to attribute 100% to the meditation or the ketogenic diet, but because I were doing both and began both at the same time. Mm-hmm. But I had a tremendous increase in short-term memory, tremendous, just a brain buzz that being in ketosis gives you. Yeah. Fat adjusted ketosis. And what I mean by that is that you're in ketosis for a period of 4 to 6 weeks. And the only way to really know if you're in ketosis, if you really want to be serious about experimenting with the ketogenic diet, I realize much of this has nothing to do with wine per se, but
no, it does. And I'm going to loop it there. Don't worry.
But if you want to be very serious about experimenting with a ketogenic diet, then you have to do testing. And you can begin your testing with urine sticks, which are cheap and pretty reliably accurate in the beginning, right? They become less accurate over time as you become adjusted to ketogenic diet. And then, of course, the gold standard for ketogenic testing is blood testing, like a finger prick with a meter that looks like a glucometer, but it measures ketone bodies or beta hydroxybutyrate in your blood, mm-hmm. and which then becomes a more precise measurement of how many ketones you're producing. And because a lot of people, the keto diet is very popular right now. It's very pop culture, right. Because Kim Kardashian's been on it and so on and so forth. Right. And now a ton of people have written about it in the blogs and the websites and so on and so forth. When I started, nobody ever heard of it, mm-hmm. right? And so, and I knew it would become a thing. And the reason I knew it would become a thing is because the ketogenic diet is the only diet that's quantifiable. You can measure it, right? Mm-hmm. So to say that you're paleo, you can't measure that. I don't really know what that means, right? But to say that you're in a state of ketosis is measurable. Mm-hmm. And so it's quantifiable. Mm-hmm. And again, it's different for everybody. Some people do have results on it. Most people have very positive results. Some people don't. But it is quantifiable. It became very large. And so people all the time say, oh, I'm on a keto diet. Well, if you're not testing, because a lot of people think they're keto, but they're really not, okay. Right? And I know inflammation is one of your things. And for me, inflammation is a significant marker of aging. And, and my goal at this point, because I'm 60, so I'm older. And
congratulations, you look fantastic.
Thank you. My goal now is really extending health span, mm-hmm. and hopefully that will lead to extended lifespan, but health span is more important to me. And so, just entering my 6th decade, I really think a lot about the next 40 years, right? And so, and I have a 30-year work plan. I'm going to take semi-retirement at 90, and so I think a lot about sort of how the building blocks come in place to have a successful aging experience. And inflammation is a very, very significant concern. And so, and really affects how I think about my diet and how I think about drinking and mm-hmm. how I think about everything as it relates to longevity, or more important, the extension of health span. Mm-hmm. So, so I continued on it, and now I'm on a modified ketogenic diet. I'm also only eat once per day. I've been eating only one time per day for about 4 years now.
And you're doing the 22-hour in between?
Yeah, 22-hour fast, mm-hmm. basically, or
mm-hmm.
20, depends on how much I drink and how late I stay up. But I eat around 6 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. And I drink wine every night unless I'm on an extended water fast, as I am now. And then, of course, I don't drink. But other than that, I don't drink during the daytime. And I don't recommend that other people do either. I don't think it's a good idea. for a number of reasons. In my case, one of the primary reasons is that drinking interrupts fat burning. And so I want to be burning fat as fuel. And the moment you put any kind of exogenous compound in your body that your body cannot absorb, it has to expel. And so the moment that it starts to process this expelling process, then you're going to stop burning fat, and you're going to start, the energy is going to be focused on this exogenous compound. So that's the primary. I also don't enjoy drinking during the daytime.
Right.
As we'll get into it, I don't really love alcohol. I happen to love wine, which is why I only drink and sell low alcohol wines.
So explain the difference, if you wouldn't mind.
Between alcohol and wine?
Yeah. I mean, I've had your products, so I understand how it feels for my body.
It just, the lower alcohol experience, in addition to all of the other attributes of the wine, which we can talk about, but, you know, it surprises people. I do a lot of podcasts or speaking or interviews, and it surprises people when I tell them, when the wine guy, who they think is here to sell wine, says that alcohol is a very dangerous neurotoxin.
Every kind of alcohol, let's clarify, every kind of alcohol is a very
any kind of alcohol is a dangerous neurotoxin. And ethyl alcohol is the same alcohol that's contained in all drinks. So if you're drinking vodka or tequila or wine, you're drinking ethyl alcohol. The question is, how much are you drinking, and what are you drinking it with? And there are additional health benefits of drinking wines, particularly red wine, because the polyphenols, flavonoids, and antiflavonoids that are contained in wine that are not contained in spirits or any other alcoholic beverages. It's unique to wine because these polyphenols come from grape skins and seeds. We can get into that in a moment. But so, you know, but alcohol ruins millions of lives every year. A lot of people shouldn't drink at all. And there have been times in my life when I've had a tempestuous relationship with alcohol when I was younger and, you know, just a bit more rowdy and, you know, just a bit of a rounder. You know, back when I drank spirits, I haven't drank spirits for like 25 years. I don't enjoy alcohol. Again, I love wine.
Yeah.
And I love the taste, and we'll talk about the alcohol effect just right after this. I love the taste of lower alcohol wines. Wine is not friendly. Alcohol is not friendly with food. So primarily, there are only two things in wine, basically, no matter whose wine it is, more or less. The two primary components of wine are ethyl alcohol and water, right? Now, from conventional wines, you have additives, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But in natural wine, basically, you have polyphenols, which are a tiny, tiny mix of the compounds that lead to better brain and cardiovascular health. But basically, it's ethyl alcohol and water. So the lower the alcohol is, the more water is in it. They don't put water in it. That's just the process of how wine is made. And so when you drink lower alcohol, additive-free natural wines, and I'll define what that means in a moment, as you know, having drank our wines, the buzz is more energized, it's lighter, it's fresher, it's more creative. It's very different than drinking a conventional wine, which is a bit like getting slugged over the head, right? And so it's just a very different experience. Not only does it not have the negative remnants of the additives and sugar and other things that are found in wine, you don't have the negative remnants associated with the typical hangover. But while you're drinking, the drinking experience is more elevated. You feel better. It's more energized.
Right. You're not going to get the hot flushing feeling.
Right. Well, most of that comes from biogenetic amines like histamine and tyramine, the flushness, but which are very commonly high, particularly in red wines. For commercial wines, I mean, we are the official wine for nearly all of the forward-leaning health conferences in the United States and around the world. And so I come in contact person to person at these events with a lot of wine drinkers, and particularly women who always say, I can't drink, I'll try your white wine. I can't drink red wine. it gives me hot flashes and makes me stuffy, and I get this pressure in my frontal lobe. And it's like, well, that's all amines, and you won't have that experience. So where they're like, I love red wine, I just can't drink it. So, well, you drink it, let me know in the morning, because you're going to feel great. Right. Because they're just which is why, our business has become successful, and because why we're endorsed by thousands of health leaders, and because the product actually works.
It does.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no dispute. You drink it, you'll feel better.
Right.
It's just, now if you drink enough of it, I've experimented with this, if you drink enough of it, you're going to get some but still not the same nasty effects. But alcohol is a lot of what leads to hangovers, and alcohol dehydrates you. So if you drink less alcohol, you're going to have less dehydration. And so that common sense will tell you that. You don't need to be a Nobel Prize winner to know that, right? You drink lower alcohol products. And for me, I don't, and for my friends and colleagues, and most of our customers probably, I don't like to have a glass of wine, or two. I like to have several. Yeah. Right. And so, and that's not because I'm trying to get higher. I'm just enjoying the experience because the wines are so extraordinary. And the only way to guarantee that you're going to get a lower alcohol impact by drinking many glasses is to start with something that's lower in alcohol in the first place. Right. And so alcohol is a very, very big deal. And we talk a lot about it. We're the only people in the wine business who talk about it, right? I mean,
well, how did you figure out that this was the right direction to go with wine? How did you get introduced to this in general?
Well, so initially I was on vacation with a friend of mine who knows that I drink a lot of wine and is one of the smartest people I know in the wine business. We're in Mexico, and I just felt like I just couldn't. I was just not processing wine, wasn't enjoying it, was getting drunk easy and like feeling bad. And I was just like, and he knew I was kind of a rouster. He knew I was a bit rowdy, and, we drink a lot together. And so I was like, I got to do something about this. So, I don't want to stop drinking. I want to give up wine. I'd long ago given up spirits, but just because it's so dreadful. In terms of the high alcohol content. But I said to him, I was like, I think I'm going to we don't make wines today, but at the time I said, I think I'm going to make a low alcohol wine. You can remove alcohol from wine through one of two technical processes, right? And so the most common one is a reverse osmosis, that you can actually separate the water and the alcohol. And then you can remove the alcohol and make a lower alcohol product. Is it
good tasting?
Well, that's the kicker. It's not the natural way to get to low alcohol, and so it's not this taste is not as spiritual. But you can get to a lower alcohol wine. So I asked him, how low can I make? Because I was interested in really like drinking just way less, but didn't want to give up wine. So it's like, what's the lowest that you could make wine and alcohol and have it still taste like wine? And he said 9%. It's actually a little bit lower than that, but he was pretty close. So much below 8 or 8.5%, it starts to not taste like wine anymore, right? Or what we know as wine. Okay. So, but even our low alcohol wines, as you know, taste different than commercial wines. When you start removing alcohol from wine, you have more water, so it's food friendly. And it's also lighter and fresher, because alcohol adds weight and density to wine. Okay. And if you eat like we eat, when you're eating whole, fresh, real food and you're eating lighter, you want a lighter, fresher beverage to go with it, because these heavy, dense, dark, big wines don't fit with fresh food. Right. I mean, they might fit with elk, right? But they don't fit with the way we eat. And I'm a red wine drinker. So finding light and fresh red wines is kind of what I'm interested in. and the red wines that I drink are between 9 and 11% alcohol usually, and you could drink them with oysters or shellfish or you could drink them with anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, how this started, and then we get into the technical aspects, but he said, well, have you tried any of the low alcohol wines coming out of Europe? And I was like, no, never heard of them. So anyway, through my journey to try and find lower alcohol wines, which was a bit of a hit and miss journey, because I'd buy these wines, I couldn't drink them, pour them down the sink, they taste horrible. Mm-hmm. And so through that journey, I discovered quite by accident an importer, an American who's based in Paris. His name is Josh Adler. He owns an import company called the Paris Wine Company. So I discovered he was importing these lower alcohol wines that were delicious and amazing wines. And I was like instantly in love. And I would buy these wines from this one particular store in San Francisco where he used to be the wine director, a very small boutique, uber organic, over the top, amazing market. And they have this little wine section, and he had a lot of wine in there. And I was super impressed, and I searched him on the internet, and I heard a podcast that he did about it. And then I called him, and what I discovered was, I was like, I love your wines, and they're low alcohol, and they taste great. And he's like, what's the secret? And he's like, well, these are natural wines. And I was like, what's a natural wine? Because when I use the term natural wine, most people are like, well, what do you mean? Aren't all wines natural? Yeah. And they're not, for the reasons I'm about to explain to you. Okay. So at that time, now natural wines have become kind of buzzy in the hip farm to table movement and hipsters in Brooklyn. And, right. So now it's, natural wines have gotten some critical acclaim or have been written about extensively. And
so are they all considered the same, or you guys go above and beyond?
No, well, let me get to that in a second. So yeah, we go above and beyond just natural, but that's the foundation of it. And so then I started kind of discovering the natural wine scene. And at the same time, because I live in Napa Valley, which is the most important wine appellation in North America. I live right in the heart of Napa Valley. And in 2005, I actually made some wine here. So I knew something about enology and lab testing. So what I started doing was lab testing these natural wines for standards of purity that I set based on my goals, which were like sugar-free, lower alcohol, low sulfites. And so I started taking these natural wines that I liked the aesthetic, the taste of, mm-hmm. and then I started lab testing them, and we started building out a set of quantifications and criteria that the wines would have to meet at lab. And an important one to me, because I was ketogenic, was that they were sugar-free. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm rabidly anti-sugar. I think sugar is the most widely abused addictive drug on the planet.
It messes with the nervous system completely.
It messes everything up, right? And it doesn't take much at all. And I live a largely sugar-free lifestyle. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm super, super neurotic about it. I mean, I like research glycemic index of anything I'm going to consider experimenting with. The first thing I'm going to do is determine. I don't experiment with many food types anymore, but when I recently decided that I was going to start, as an example, we'll get right back to wine. I recently decided I was going to start experimenting with different beans and legumes. Okay. And they've gotten a bad rap in part of the paleo movement and even in some of the ketogenic movement. But I decided that beans are the only common staple in the blue zones. Okay. Moderate alcohol use is a common staple among most of the blue zones, not all but two. But beans are consumed regularly across all of the blue zones. Now, the blue zone there are issues with the blue zones, but beans are a high fiber, high protein alternative to eating animal protein.
But the downside is the inflammation that it causes.
Yeah. So I was going to start experimenting with them. So I started looking at researching the glycemic index and fiber content of different beans. I'd love to get your intake offline on beans, but because I haven't really dove deep down into it yet, but just started research. Historically, I haven't eaten them. So anyway, so the natural wine. So here's what's happened in the wine business. Let's get right down to the wine facts quickly about kind of what's wrong with the wine business.
Okay.
And the dirty, dark secrets of the wine industry that nobody knew anything about until I came along. I mean, the information is public. It's just that the wine industry has been able to keep it a secret. So here's what's happened in the wine business. The exact same thing that's happened in our food supply. So there's been massive corporate consolidation. And in the food industry, 9 or 10 companies touch most of what most people eat. Like, unless you're eating local, right? There are 9 or 10 food companies that touch most of everything that's consumed in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing has happened in the wine industry. So for the last 30 years, been massive corporate consolidation fed by corporate greed and a lot of capital in Wall Street. And so today, 52% of all the wines manufactured, we'll get into the factory in a moment, 52% of the wines manufactured in the United States are made by just 3 giant conglomerates. And the top 30 wine companies in the US make over 70% of the US wines. Mm-hmm. Now, they don't want you to know that. So these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, marketing conglomerates, hide behind thousands of brands and labels. Mm-hmm. So when you walk in the grocery store and you see hundreds of bottles or multi-hundreds of bottles in some cases of wines, most of those wines are made by just a handful of companies. Mm-hmm. Now, they don't want you to know that. So they have these stories and labels. See, most people buy wines based on labels. Yeah. And so these labels want you to think that you're drinking from something hip, or you're drinking from something from a farmhouse, or you're drinking from a chateau, or you're drinking from this little farmer. When in fact, most of those wines are made in giant wine factories in Central California that are football fields large. Wow. What we call giant tank farms, as far as you can see, right? Now, all of what I'm about to tell you, all of what I just told you about the wine industry is all easily verifiable with a Google search. Mm-hmm. And if you want to see what a wine factory looks like, you can search that too, right? And so drones don't lie, right? And so Google Earth doesn't lie. I mean, it is what it is. Right. And the sales figures that I just gave you for these leading wine companies are also all available online. But here's the dirty, dark secret, what the wine industry doesn't want you to know. There are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking. Now, what do we know about these 76 additives? Not much. Some of them are natural, and a few of them are highly toxic. That we do know. What effect do they have on our body? We don't know, because there's no real testing to validate that, because nobody's financed that testing, mm-hmm. right? The FDA and the US government is in bed with the wine industry, and here's why. So of these 76 additives, the ones you don't know anything about, although if you do a web search, if you do a Google search for FDA wine additives, you'll see the list. It's a government document. A lot of people have published on it. The reason you don't know about these 76 additives is because the wine industry has spent millions of dollars in lobby money. They're a very powerful lobby to keep contents labeling off of wine bottles. So wine is the only major food product without a contents label on it, not to mention nutritional information. It doesn't have any nutritional information either. Don't know how much sugar's in it. Mm-hmm. Would be the primary information that you would want to know nutritionally off of a wine bottle. But so you don't have any idea of how much sugar's in it, but more importantly than that, you don't know if any of these toxic additives are in it either, mm-hmm. because they're not required to put a contents label on it.
And I know why that's important to me, but why do you think that other people should care about that?
Why they should care about drinking additives, or
yes.
Yeah. I mean, well, we don't really know in totality. I can't tell you from a scientific point of view. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, on the more toxic ones like dimethyl dicarbonate, I can tell you about the toxicity of that, and Wikipedia will tell you about it too. But we don't really know what the long-term health effects of it are. But here's what I do know. I don't want to drink these additives for any host of different reasons, including inflammation, including neurological and biological health. I choose not, I don't eat packaged food. I don't eat processed foods. I choose to consume as little chemical or additives. Now, look, we're all at environmental risk. The moment we step outside of our house or inside of our house, we have environmental risk. So we can't be like living this pure life of, pristine elements unless we want to move to somewhere in remote Alaska or something, right?
Right.
But we're still going to be subject to all of modern day environmental influences, including any kind of, I don't use skincare products but including any kind of things we're brushing our teeth with, the foaming agents that are in toothpaste. I mean, I don't use toothpaste, right? So, I mean, it's like, I don't use.
Okay, what are you using? You threw that out there. What are you using?
I use coconut oil for everything on my body.
Okay.
I use it. I don't use commercial deodorant. I use coconut oil. It takes care of me. I shave with it. I moisturize with it. It works great. I know what's in it, right?
Yeah.
And so it's 100% virgin coconut oil. Okay. And I make toothpaste out of coconut oil, sea salt, and baking soda.
Okay.
Right. And then I'd use coconut oil for pulling, for gum health. And I floss, of course. So anyway, but we can't be totally protected, but to the extent that I can avoid, putting chemicals in my body that I have no idea what they are or what they do, I just like to avoid that. Right. And it seems to have served me well so far.
Yeah.
So I think that's how I sort of think about additives. But here's the other thing I think about them. If you choose to drink dimethyl dicarbonate, I think you should have that choice. I think there should be transparency in labeling. I think you should know what you're consuming and have the choice as to whether or not you want to do that. And a lot of people wouldn't care, right? My customers care, right? My friends care.
Right.
My colleagues and people I associate with in the wellness and health community care. A lot of people don't, which is cool. Right. I'm not here to judge you whether you care or not. I just think you should have the choice.
Yeah.
To drink it or not. And so anyway, so natural wines are easily defined, and there's no international certification for them. Dry Farm Wines does have a certification process that goes far and beyond just being natural. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But France just announced about 2 months ago that they'll be the first country to certify natural wines.
Fantastic.
And the natural wine movement really started in France, and that's where it's the most active. Okay. And where it's the most vocal. And so France has a very strict appellation rules and systems. And so about a decade ago, France developed a category called Vin de la France, which was a category of wines that did not meet their strict appellation rules. Right? I mean,
they were below standard.
Well, no, they're not, and they're above standard from our perspective. Okay. So the appellation rules are very strict and in many cases require the use of pesticides and herbicides, right, in order to produce a very standard type of wine, right? Okay. And so they require the use of sulfur dioxide in many of the appellations. And so the requirement for sulfur dioxide is super common worldwide. Because it preserves and protects wines. It also sterilizes them to ensure that you get a shelf-dependable, predictable product. Natural wines have not been sterilized, therefore they can have bottle-to-bottle variation because they still have living bacteria in them. Mm-hmm. That living bacteria is and Dr. David Perlmutter has written several times about our wines, this living bacteria that exists in natural wines is also very beneficial to the gut microbiome. Conventional wines don't have those bacteria because they've been sterilized with sulfur dioxide. And so when you sterilize a wine, you mummify it or McDonaldize it, right? You create this wine that every single bottle tastes the same, you know, and so that's what the appellations, you know, are interested in, is protecting the reputation of the wines from that appellation. Let's say it's from Burgundy or Bordeaux, right? Any Burgundy wine or any Bordeaux wine needs to have a certain protected taste profile. That's the reason they require the use of sulfur dioxide. Well, natural winemakers don't want to use it because it kills the living soul of the wine and kills the living bacteria in the wine. And so they don't want to use it. And so there was a rub with the French government and the appellations about the use of these additives and chemicals. And so France did boldly, you know, it was a very big move, created a category of wines called Vin de France that said, okay, these wines don't fit inside of any appellation because they don't want to follow the rules, but we're not going to stop them from producing it, but they can't use an appellation name on it. So we're going to give them a new name. Okay. Now, a couple of months ago, they came out and said, oh, well, we're going to be the first country to certify natural wines. And the EU has also said or projected that they will have contents labeling on wine bottles within the next 2 or 3 years. We'll see if that happens, but France is definitely certifying natural wines. So, but here's what a natural wine is. Even though it presently doesn't have an international certification, it has a very, very well-known definition within the wine community. Okay. First of all, it's organically or biodynamically grown. Biodynamic farming, everybody knows what organic is. Biodynamic farming is a prescriptive advanced form of organic farming. So they're farmed organically or biodynamically. Number two, they are fermented with wild native yeast. Well, what does that mean? Well, wild native yeast are present on the grape skin of every grape berry in the world at the time of harvest. It's a white waxy film that is on the skin of the grape. You can scrape it off with your fingernail, but it's a waxy white film. It's yeast that's been collected through the air, natural yeast that's been collected that's indigenous to the vineyard where the grape is grown. This is how wines were fermented for all but the last 70 years. All wines before that were fermented with wild native yeast. Okay. And in fact, if you were to pick a ripe cluster of berries and throw it in a bucket, throw it in the bucket with such force that the grape skins would break, it would begin to ferment in the bucket on its own, requires nothing else. Because fermented wine is nothing but yeast, and when the yeast eats the sugar, right? And so they're fermented with wild native yeast in what's called a spontaneous fermentation. And I'll come back to why that term is important when I explain how commercial wines are made. So you get a spontaneous fermentation with this wild native yeast. Now, commercial wines are not made with wild native yeast. They are fermented with genetically modified lab-grown yeast. What do we know that means from a health point of view? We have no idea. But the reason that commercial winemakers don't use these native wild yeasts is because they're too fragile. They're too temperamental. And you can't make wine in very large quantities with them because they're so temperamental and fragile. They also will not withstand a very high alcohol environment. Alcohol will kill the native yeast. So turn the page to these genetically modified lab culture yeast, which are designed and programmed to be sturdy, strong, withstand high alcohol environments. You can make wine in very large volumes with them because they're very sturdy and easy to work with. So you don't get a spontaneous fermentation in that case. What happens is you press the juice off of the berries. It goes into a tank. And then they pour sulfur dioxide in the tank to kill the native yeast. And then they inoculate it with these lab-grown yeast. And the reason they kill the native yeast is because they don't want the yeast strains competing, right? Because this leads to problems.
Because it would change the taste of it.
Right. And the third reason that they use these genetically modified yeast is that you can buy them in flavor profiles.
Mm.
Just like people, when they, when they make sourdough is a very, I don't eat bread, but sourdough is a very popular thing during the pandemic. Different yeast strains give different flavors to the bread, right?
Yeah.
And so everybody's always trying to get your mother, the mother yeast strain, right? And so depending upon where the mother comes from is going to impact the complexity of the flavor in bread. Well, the same thing is true in yeast for wine.
Mm-hmm.
So you can buy yeast, commercial yeast, these genetically modified lab-grown yeast, you can buy them in different flavor profiles. So let's say that you grow this industrial crappy grape in Central California, you want to taste like it's from the Mediterranean. In Italy, they have a yeast for that, right?
Okay.
To give it these flavor profiles. Now, of course, it doesn't taste that way in its authenticity, but it tastes more like that, right? It's never going to taste like that unless it's from there.
Okay.
But they have a yeast for that. So, and then third, natural wines are additive free.
Okay.
And we do testing to ensure that. Now, let's talk about dry farm wines for a moment. And let me also mention, and we'll wrap up the podcast shortly with, well, if you're not drinking dry farm wines, how do you find natural wine? And what does that, what's that process? Because I'm not here trying to sell wine.
Yeah.
I want to educate people. And if
Right.
you're drinking wine, and particularly if you're a regular wine drinker, I think you should be drinking natural wines. And I think you should be drinking lower alcohol natural wines. If you're not getting them from us, then I'm going to tell you how to find them or potentially find them.
And at least be informed.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now dry farm wines has a certification. So that goes way beyond natural farming or natural winemaking. So first of all, we require, as is in our name, dry farm wines, that all wines are irrigation free. And just in the 700 farms we work with, dry farming saves 16 billion gallons of water a year, right? Just in the farms we work with. And we don't sell any domestic wine. And the primary reason is more than 99% of US vineyards are irrigated.
Okay.
And why do you irrigate? Because it's more profitable. You get higher yields and fruit that weighs more, fruit sold by the ton, more it weighs, more it's worth. So we don't have time to go down the wormhole of irrigation, but we require dry farming, which is the use of no irrigation, organic or biodynamic farming, native yeast fermentation, and no additives. In addition to that, sugar-free. Not all natural wines are sugar-free. Low alcohol. We don't allow wines in excess of 12.5%. Not all natural wines are low in alcohol.
Okay.
So we have these additional criteria around irrigation, sugar, and alcohol. And we also, most natural wines will meet this criteria, but we also have a cap on sulfites. So sulfites can be as high as 75 parts per million naturally occurring.
Mm-hmm.
So all fermented foods, whether it's sauerkraut or kimchi or all kinds of foods have sulfites in them. But
why would that be important? Why would that be important? Why would it be important to quantify that?
We don't know. Nobody really knows. And sulfur has been used since the Roman times to preserve wine and other foods, right? We don't know. There's no real substantive, there's really no substantive research on what it means. It's thought to be safe. Mm-hmm. But again, it's just another aspect. If I can have less of it, that's my goal, okay. Right? If I can have less of it, I certainly don't want it added as an additive. And so if I can have less of it, great. Here's what we do know about sulfur and the addition of sulfur dioxide for sure, is that when it kills the wine, when it sterilizes the wine, it also kills the spirit and soul of the wine, okay. Because it kills the bacteria. It kills the life within the wine. Okay. Therefore, it affects the taste of the wine substantially, right? And so there are a couple different reasons why we're not interested in it. But the US legal limit on sulfur is 350 parts per million. Our average wine has 39 parts per million, right? Okay. So although we will allow up to 70 parts per million because can be naturally occurring, but we rarely see wines that get anywhere close to it. And as I said, our average is 39 parts per million. So we're doing lab testing for purity on our standards.
Mhm.
And, we're super health and fitness and wellness as a company. It's our ethos, right? And so our customers trust us because we're living the same lifestyle that we promote, right? And so, as you know, in the health and fitness and supplement business, I'm sure you're well aware of this. You go to these health conferences like a Paleo FX or, Mindshare or wherever you go to these health conferences, and you see people there selling products purporting to sell you a health product, but I look at them and they don't look healthy.
Nope.
I'm like, I don't, I don't take health advice from somebody that doesn't look healthy.
Right.
Right. And so I don't, I would never hire a personal trainer who didn't have the body I wanted.
Right.
Right. I mean, you go in the gym, you see these personal trainers, their biceps and bellies, right?
Yeah.
Like what I call the bicep and belly look. It's like, you can't be my trainer because you don't have the body I want.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, we all do, and people see us and know that we have, a very strict adherence to a way of life, a natural way of life, eating whole and real foods and drinking wines and lab testing. And our customers trust us to bring them an authentic product. So we're the only wine company in the world that does what we do, right? And we're also touring farms and meeting with farmers and vetting the farming practices. We're not just taking their word for it, although that's not historically been a problem. Natural wine growers are kind of like hippie activists. They're like, they're just hippies. They live the same life. For most of them, they eat and grow they eat what they grow on their farms and their neighbors' farms. I mean, I have, not now during COVID, but in 2019, I was in Europe over 200 days, going from farm to farm, and I have a whole team of people that do this all over the world, South America, South Africa, all across Europe. And we're living on these farms, and usually I stay with them. They usually have a guest bedroom or two, or a place for us to stay, or we'd stay in a nearby shacky motel, because these are all things that are they're in the country.
They're in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
In the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so anyway, so that so this is kind of the product that we bring our customers, and we do lab testing, and we're very vigilant about, and we have the trust of hundreds of thousands of people who know us. And if you get wines from us, you get other collateral materials in our magazine, and we're not just a wine company. We're really about holistic health, meditation, breath work, water, time in nature. These are all ideas that we promote actively through our wine company. So we're not really just a wine company. We're really trying to promote a way of living that we believe produces not only a better experience, right? Not only a higher, more creative, a more joyful, peaceful experience,
right,
but it leads to, a greater extension in health span, right?
Absolutely.
No matter what your age is.
Absolutely.
Whether you're 25 or 60, you should have the same goal of extending your health span and avoiding disease. And inflammation is the leading cause of this, right? So anyway, you have any questions on that? I just ate up like a whole bunch of airtime there, but it was just a lot to say.
This is amazing. It's amazing because I believe that the inflammation is aging us. And I believe that by way of our ingredients, everything that you just covered, we can turn on or turn off inflammation internally. And so I really appreciate everything you just shared, because I see in myself and in those around me that this aging process can be sped up or slowed down by way of our ingredients.
No question about it. I would tell you, look at people, there's genetic signaling. We have, some of us had genetic advantages that others don't have, but that's not the full story. We can all influence our genetic signaling with our diet, and exercise is important, but at the end of the day, diet is going to play a much, much bigger role in our health span and outcome than exercise. Although that most people who are very vigilant about their protecting what they put in their body are also exercising as well. So again, it gets difficult with all these cofactors to really determine what's working and what's not. I'm just trying to do a little bit of all of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the epigenetics of being alive. We get to look at every bit of the switches we turn on or off in the body, and everything you said makes sense to me. And, you know, if we need to dive in further another time, I would really look forward to that. This has been really informative. And I really
let me just cover before we leave.
Yeah.
Obviously, the how to find natural wines just quickly.
Yeah.
They're very difficult to find. Buying a natural wine because I covered some of these points earlier, doesn't mean it's going to meet all of our criteria, our certification.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important, whether people buy wine or not from us, buying wine from us is the only way to get our certified wines.
Mm-hmm.
And our aesthetic and the things that come along with dry farm wines. But even if you're not doing that, I think that, you know, you should try to drink natural wines. It's really important for your health. And you can do that only in a couple of different ways. There's a smartphone app called Raisin, like the dried grape.
Okay.
That only really works well in metropolitan areas, because metropolitan areas, large metro areas like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, these are going to be the only places where you're going to really find a lot of natural wine.
Okay.
So, but Raisin is based in Europe. The app works really well in Europe, like in Paris or London or Berlin. Really well in Europe. It works pretty well in New York, San Francisco, and major metropolitan areas here. It's a map-based app, super easy to use. Okay. And it will identify restaurants that serve natural wines, natural wine bars, and retailers that sell natural wine. And generally speaking, a wine retailer doesn't sell natural wine. It would have to be a natural wine retailer, right? So if you're a natural wine retailer, you never sell conventional wines, okay, right? Just because you're an activist. Okay. You're just like, it's a movement, it's a revolution. You would never sell conventional wines. Okay. And so there are natural wine shops across New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and so on and so forth. You can also do a Google search for any marketplace that you're in. And, you know, it's possible, even if Raisin's not active in your market, it's possible that you could find some outlier, you know, or some place where you might find a natural wine. And then covering that final point, just because a wine is organic doesn't mean it's natural. So when you go into Whole Foods and you see organic wines, they're probably not natural. Mm-hmm.
And they're not testing for all the toxins you guys are testing for, and they're not testing for the sugar.
Right. Mm-hmm. No. So anyway, but yeah, thanks for having me on today. I'm sorry to eat up all that airtime, but you know, in 45 minutes, there's so much to cover.
There is.
Right? And we could have gone down 10 other wormholes about why irrigation is bad for the earth, bad for the plant, and ultimately not as healthy for you. Yeah. You know, there's just a whole bunch of wormholes we could go down, but anyway.
Another time, Todd, another time. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm sure everyone's going to just love to hear more. And I really appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks for having me today.
All right. Everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Tricia Reid, your host, and this is Todd White from Dry Farm Wines. Thank you.